This is a picture of my daughter's daughter, my granddaughter, Kendall. I think it's the first time I put up a picture of my granddaughter. I just couldn't resist any longer. Last night, little Kendall came to our house to visit, and she was on my shoulder, and our daughter was there, and her girlfriend came along, Katie's friend, also named Katie. So we had the two Katies visiting us with their little babies. And I'm holding our granddaughter, Kendall, on my shoulder, and the little boy wanted to climb up on my lap too, and I was very happy to oblige, and it was a joy for me to have the two of them there. I'm afraid that our congregation may perceive me as a rather one-dimensional or emotionally flat personality. And I want you to understand that there are other dimensions of me you may not have met yet, including my great love for my family and my joy in welcoming friends into our home. And so I hope this picture helps you see me a little more in a little other dimension of my being. Now you can erase that picture so it's not a distraction. But I want us to also, during this season of Epiphany, to perceive other dimensions of Jesus that we don't often think of, as I indicated in the children's message. I don't think Jesus was an emotionally flat person. I think he was an emotionally full person. He was acquainted with grief, we know. He felt lonely. He was joyful and excited at times. He was sympathetic with the pain of others and compassionate. And I imagine Jesus as a child that he ran and jumped and did somersaults. And I like to think that maybe he carried some of that playfulness into his adult years as well. Why wouldn't he? He affirmed the goodness of having the faith of a child. He welcomed children. He embraced them. Maybe he carried some of that childlike quality into adulthood. I like to think he had fun at times, probably traveling with his disciples. They had fun times together. We're beginning a 5-Sunday series on the passions of Jesus. My friend Judy is a passionate, soulful, emotional Christian. She was the Bible story teacher in Vacation Bible School in another congregation for years and years. And she always recruited congregation members to be the actors, and she got costumes ready and props, and they would dramatize the Bible story as Judy enthusiastically told the story to the children. The church acted it out. And then Judy engaged the children. What's the story about? And what can we learn from Jesus today? And how can we live this out as followers of Jesus? She's a great teacher, passionate and enthusiastic. Likewise, she sang in the choir and in the praise band with enthusiasm. She loved to praise God. Judy loved her parents deeply, and she grieved them dearly when they passed. Judy's mom died of cancer, and we had a Relay for Life team raising funds for the American Cancer Society, and Judy was the captain of our team, and she brought her passion to it. She helped us have team dinners with decorations and music and prayer leading up to the big event of Relay for Life. She helped us organize the walking on the relay and the prayer vigil that we kept and the camping equipment that we needed, and it was a high energy team, I think greatly because of Judy's passion that she brought and out of her own pain in the loss of her mother to cancer. You see, we are not just rational beings who make decisions on what we do based on information. We are also emotional beings who are moved by our experiences and our emotions to be things and do things and respond in certain ways. Judy was a high school cheerleader back in the day, and she carried that same mode of operation into her relationships in family and church and community. She worked in the local Parks and Recreation Department, and I know she brought energy to their programs as well as to the church. Judy's a person who feels a wide range of emotions. You've seen people like that. I think I'm by relatively a more flat personality, but I do have a range of emotions. Judy had a wide range. I saw her in joy and excitement, and I saw her in sorrow. In fact, Judy is the person in all my years of pastoring whose grief was most poignant. When she lost her dear husband, Judy's depth of sorrow was so overwhelming. She was so expressive of her joys and of her sorrows that it just hit all of us in the pit of our stomachs as we saw her go through this terrible grief years ago. Do you know people who are more widely emotional than you? I celebrate that God made us with emotions. Wouldn't it be a bland world if we canceled emotions out of it? Let us thank God for creating us with emotions. Sometimes they're hard to understand, especially the cloudier emotions. We don't always know how to cope with things like anger or how to respond when other people show those emotions. I'm a lot like my dad, who is so stable in his emotional life. I have a lot of his calm, but I want to assure you, I have a full range of emotions. In fact, this week I was angry. Not in preparation for the sermon. It just happened that way, that I went through some anger this week, and it wasn't toward anyone in the church. Aren't you glad? And it wasn't toward my wife. Aren't you glad? And I'm not telling you who it was. Aren't you glad? But I experience anger. And what if I was angry at someone in the congregation? And what if you were? Isn't that part of the natural range of human emotion, that sometimes we experience anger, either in ourselves or in others? And do we have enough grace and knowledge to respond to each other afterwards, to restore the peace and the love between us, to experience reconciliation as a gift of God that transcends even emotional events in our relationships? It should. It does. It can. I want us to embrace our emotional nature this week. In this series, 5 Sundays from now to February 9th, the Epiphany, the time of discovery, of enlightenment. I want us to be open to discovering more about our own emotional makeup, greater self-awareness, greater understanding of human emotion by looking at scriptures and asking what emotions might have been expressed in Jesus or in the other characters in these gospel passages. Reverend Peter Wallace wrote a book called The Passionate Jesus because, he said, we might assume Jesus was always the calm, cool, collected, spiritual teacher, never upset. But Jesus, if we look closer, was direct, expressive, deeply authentic. At times he played the provocateur, intentionally stirring up the crowd, stirring up the community. Remember the tumult in Jerusalem by Palm Sunday that Jesus caused? I don't think he accomplished that by being an emotionally flat, closed down type of person. I think he was expressive and sometimes dramatic and in your face and sometimes emotional. Do you think God could use us more if our emotional life was sanctified, was submitted to the lordship of Jesus? I think so. I think we can get to a higher level of passion for God and for the things of God as we surrender our emotional life to the lordship of Jesus. And that doesn't mean putting us in a harness or making us become a restrained, withdrawn person, but freeing us to interact with others on an emotional level, to be fully, authentically human in heart and life. In John 11, we see Jesus with Mary and Martha in their grief over the death of their brother Lazarus. They were crying, and it says, Jesus saw their tears and the tears of their friends, and he was deeply disturbed and troubled. Now, I think we largely gloss over that. But what does a person look like when they're deeply disturbed and troubled? You've seen it. The color washes out of their face. Their posture maybe collapses. tears are welling up in their eyes or flowing. Sometimes their knees buckle. I've seen people falling to their knees, can't stand because of their distress. Maybe you felt a tightening in your chest in an emotional situation, the punch in the pit of the stomach. All of us have felt deeply disturbed, and it comforts me to know from John's gospel that Jesus felt deeply distressed and troubled in the face of the grief of Mary and Martha. It shows us how fully human he was. John's gospel is teaching us the divine nature of Jesus, but if we look between the lines, we will, and even in the text, we will also see the full humanity of Jesus. Most of us are now accustomed to using emoticons in textual communication in our lives. Emoticons help express what we're feeling as we give someone a text message or an email message. Sometimes when I send a text, it's just about information, but I want to make sure the person knows I'm not upset. I'm just telling you this so you'll know. And so I put a little smiley face on there, letting them know this is coming from a happy place. Don't get bent out of shape. We're at peace, people. Go ahead and smile. It's all right. How many of you have used emoticons? Many of us have. They're part of the language of our culture. I want to suggest a way to read Scripture you might try. Maybe Mark's Gospel. Read through it and draw emoticons where you think you see in the text certain emotions, or you suspect these are the emotions that might have been at work in the hearers or in the people who are talking or acting, and put those emoticons into your text. And then read it again and see how that sort of changes the flavor or brings the Scriptures to life. In a way, that's what I'm trying to do, we're trying to do in the next 5 sermons, is look at these gospel passages and see what emotions might be in them. Today's emotion is love, as reflected on the picture. And this passage where God's voice says to Jesus, "You're my son, the beloved." God's pleasure is so strong that he's expressing to Jesus there. The baptism marks the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, and he begins that ministry immersed in the love of God and is sent forth to express God's love to all. I was in a cemetery yesterday. Mary Ann's congregation lost the matriarch of their smaller congregation, Wanda Young. She was a spiritual mother to many in the church. And Mary Ann stayed at her home overnight many times. On Wednesdays, she'd drive down there, have choir practice in the evening, stay the night with Wanda, who's 86 years young, and then be in the community for ministry the next day. So they became close friends and shared many times of prayer for that congregation's life. And so we pray for God's comfort to the Willow congregation today. In the cemetery, we were walking to the graveside for the committal service, and I walked past an old grave marker from 1916, 100 years ago now. And this grave marker was the burial place of a little boy, and it only said 1916 to 1921. So I knew he was only 5 when he died, and we have one son who was very sick at the age of 5 and in ICU, and we nearly lost him. And so I identified with this grave marker that only said, "Our son." And I read between the lines. That was all the text, right? But I identified with the parents who 100 years ago nearly stood at that place and had to commit their son's body to the earth and his spirit to God. I imagined their emotion. I imagined their loss. This is what I'm inviting us to do with the Scriptures in this Epiphany season, is to read between the lines, look for the emotions, see what this can teach us about the heart of Jesus. Of course, I felt my love for my son when I stood there by that grave marker, and I wanted to call him, and I did call him later in the day. God called out to Jesus, "You're my son, the beloved." And we are blessed because that love has reached to us. May we find power through the Scriptures to love our enemies, to love those who hurt us, so to extend the unconditional love of God that was begun in that dramatic moment of Jesus' baptism. Love is the centerpiece of the gospel. Love is the centerpiece of life. We'll sing, "Wash, O God, our sons and daughters," thinking, may the love of God immerse us. As we remember the baptism of Jesus, may we all be baptized in God's love. Would you rise to sing?